We do appreciate that you took time out of your schedule to join us for this webinar today, mitigating high risk operations. This is a topic that we have addressed before, but we recently became aware of this kind of operation. It's not something I was familiar with, and so we thought we'd present it to you. We are pleased today to have Powderbird of Alta, Utah, coming on and talking about avalanche mitigation. Our speakers today will be Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI, and Kevin O'Rourke, who is the Vice President of Operations for Powderbird. I will provide Kevin's web address and email towards the end of this webinar. This is an interactive event. We do encourage your questions. There should be a question module at the bottom of your screen. Most of you are familiar with Zoom now. And so just enter your question and we will try to answer as many of the questions as we can towards the end of the webinar. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Well, today's webinar is focusing on mitigating risk in helicopter operations. And I know we've addressed this topic either directly or indirectly several times on our webinars. And because aeronautical decision-making is something that we believe is vital to reducing the accident rate in the industry. We also recognize that it helps to learn by example of what that looks like. And that's why we're happy to bring out for you today's webinar, or Zoom, featuring Powderbird, a helicopter operator from Alta, Utah. They have been flying in the mountains of Utah for many years, conducting heli skiing operations. So right there, you have a handful of factors that require additional thought to reduce those risks. Flying in the mountains, flying in the cold winter weather are both particularly significant just by themselves, and that requires training and planning to do well. But we didn't bring Powderbird here to talk about heli skiing. This is another time where we heard about something unusual in industry, and we found out something that they were doing safely with the helicopters that left us impressed. In this case, Powderbird routinely carries high explosives with them, working with the state of Utah and nearby ski resorts to produce planned avalanches. How about that for a helicopter segment? So Powderbird has been conducting these operations since 1970s, so obviously they have a process down to a science. I think you'll see that they have done significant work to reduce their risk when flying in the mountains in the winter with high explosives. So let's get started, Dan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. I do appreciate that. And would like to invite Kevin to join us now, please. There we are, Kevin. Glad that we certainly appreciate you taking time out of your schedule today to join us. We know we are right in the middle of ski season there in Utah, and so we are grateful for your time and your sharing of your knowledge with the industry.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's get right into the questions. First of all, tell me a little bit about Powderbird. How did you folks get started?
So Powderbird was founded in 1973. The founder, Greg Smith, was a ski instructor from Aspen who had come to Snowbird right when it opened in 1971, was impressed with the terrific skiing here. And while he was here, he had heard the Forest Service was putting out a request for proposal to acquire a helicopter ski permit. And so that intrigued him. He tells the story that he took $600, turned it into quarters, plugged it all into a payphone and made a bunch of phone calls. And he ended up with the permit, got the business started a couple years later in '73. And since that time, Powderbird's been operating continuously here, doing primarily helicopter skiing, but also some of this avalanche mitigation work we're going to talk about today.
Well, now I understand that you may have expanded a little bit, that you now do heli skiing outside of the U.S. as well. Is that outside the U.S. ski season, or do you just have different operations in different locations?
Yeah, so going back to about 2000, really, we expanded into what we called Powderbird International. Primarily, we focused on Greenland initially, We've operated up there now for 18 seasons. And it's kind of an extension of our season. We go up there in late March or the beginning of April as things are winding down in Utah, and operate anywhere from 4 to 5, even up to 8 weeks in Greenland. That's been the main focus of our international operations. But we also have conducted summer operations in Chile and Argentina, and we've done custom trips in places like Japan and Turkey, and done some in Iceland, and I guess about 8 countries now.
Wow, that sounds really intriguing, quite fascinating. I'm an advocate to talk to Jim a little later on about trying to follow you around and do a story for the magazine, I think, and work with Gina Kovicevic, our editor. You mentioned summer flying in the Southern Hemisphere, summer flying there, winter down there. What does Powderbird do in the summer here in the U.S.?
So in the US here, we basically, our operation is seasonal. So what we mainly do in the summer is planning, sales, staffing, things like that, and get ready. So we wrap up our ski season here in mid-April. We get back to it in December. And so if we're operating helicopters, it's for Powderbird anyway, it's in these other locations. But what the aircraft do, we work with 2 different helicopter companies, and they get heavily involved in wildland firefighting. And so these helicopters all go on fire contracts, and that's pretty much how they keep busy all summer.
What kind of aircraft do you operate, and how many pilots and aircraft mechanics do you have during the winter?
So we operate 3 helicopters currently. They're Eurocopter AS350 B3s and B3E. So we have a mix of those. At various times, we've operated as many as 5 helicopters. Currently, with the conditions we have in Utah, we're at 3. Another helicopter we've used here that works well for us is the Bell 407. We haven't done that in a number of years, but that was a helicopter that performed well for our operation as well. We have 5 pilots currently that rotate on those 3 helicopters, and we have 2 mechanics that are on site daily to manage the aircraft as well.
Okay, we alluded a little to this in our introductions. Mountain flying requires a different set of skills than, say, if you were flying in the rest of the United States. And winter flying also has different requirements. Can you tell me about flying in the Wasatch Mountains in the middle of winter?
Yeah, so I think, the main challenges that we are facing here is the elevations that we're dealing with. We operate.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry,
Are they here now?
We operate from a base that's at 8,300 feet. So we're taking off from our base at quite a high elevation. Our highest landing, highest landing zone is 11,400 feet. So I think right away it's the challenge that elevation kind of poses. The other thing here is we are dealing with a lot of wind, and so the wind is. Sorry, I have someone here, I think, speaking. I don't know if you hear that.
I did hear that. I think it was coming in accidentally. I think I got it muted now.
Okay. So, we have, this is a fairly windy range. We're on the edge of the Great Basin. We get a lot of wind in here. So managing that component of it, we deal with a lot of whiteout conditions with the very dry powder that Utah is famous for. We also deal with a bright out condition as well, when we just have very bright sunny skies, when we're flying from, bright sun into shadow to pick up things like that. And then we have a hazard here. I think that's something we really focus on with our guides, and it's a hazard where the helicopter can sort of break through into the snowpack. So when we're landing in the snowpack, what is the snow surface? What are the layers like? And how do we create landing zones that are strong and where the helicopter is less likely to fall through on one side.
Now, do I understand through your permit, you're not able to establish a helipad as such? You just have to use what's ever available at the time?
Yeah, so once we leave our base, then we are operating in as is natural conditions. So we're landing on ridge lines that are unimproved and in meadows and pickup areas down below that are all unimproved. So we can do in our permit, we're allowed to trim, smaller type vegetation for tail rotor clearance and things like that. We never take down big trees, but we can trim out small stuff. And then what we do is basically we pack in our landings as we get into places. We boot pack them. We refill the boot holes with snow. We pack them with our skis. And over the course of the season, we'll end up with improve their snow pads that we just improve the snow and we strengthen it by doing that. We're also able to put out biodegradable, it's actually a photodegradable orange flagging. That'll be a reference for the pilot landing. It'll give a wind direction. And then we can use fluorescent chalk to mark the landing areas. So the issue with that for us is every time it snows, we have to go back up and redo all that.
When I would imagine most winters it snows a fair amount in Utah. What kind of training do you put your pilots through? Is there recurrent training every season before you start the ski season?
Yeah, so our pilots typically before they come to us, they'll have had previous mountain flying experience. A lot of them gain that in Alaska. They'll work up there, flying in the winter, flying on glaciers, learning to land on snow and ice. We've had pilots come from New Zealand where they've had that previous experience there as well. So anyone that really gets sent to us on a contract they'll come with a lot of that experience previous. When they arrive here the first time, we go through kind of what I refer to as a progression. We go out into the terrain with no guests. One of our lead guides, or typically I go do this with them, we'll fly out and we start in landing areas that are, less complicated, pretty straightforward. And we kind of vet their skill set. How are they managing the easier stuff? And then we progress up through into the more challenging conditions. We go out when the conditions allow for us to go out and practice landing in wide open areas with whiteout snow conditions. We go in and we shoot those landings. We land near cornices. We teach them how to keep the aircraft safe from exposure to avalanches. When we're landing in avalanche terrain, particularly at the pickups, we have to land in the proper spots. We're operating in avalanche terrain, so we have to make sure the aircraft is positioned in a safe location. And then once someone's on this team as a pilot, we really try to keep them. We try to develop that experience with them, train with them, and then keep them on our team for years. And we've had good success with that. We've had pilots that have flown here for over 20 years, 20 seasons in a row. We currently have a pilot here that's been here he's about 12 years. And we've got a couple pilots now that are newer, but they've each got three and 4 seasons with us already. So that's a big thing is, as we do with our guides, once they're trained and once they're familiar with our operation, we've been successful in keeping people around.
Well, it sounds like your corporate knowledge over the 40 years you've been doing the skiing operation and then the recurrent training just helps to, again, mitigate any of the possible errors. I'm not familiar with the Wasatch Range weather patterns. Does weather change there fairly rapidly, or is it something that you can predict and see how things are coming throughout the day or a week ahead of time? How does the weather work there?
It's kind of a mix. We actually have a lot of weather information here. We have a lot of remote weather sites. There's a lot of ski resorts. There's a major airport here. So we actually have an abundance of weather data, sometimes almost too much. to get through. So we have a very good sense of what's coming, what the main weather patterns are. We actually have a meteorologist on our staff that does a localized forecast for us, and he's looking specifically for things that'll impact our operation. But what we get here that I would say that is the rapidly changing thing is we can get convective issues with cloud development just through the heating of the day. In the canyons here, that can occur very quickly. We also can get just, we get inversions here. We'll get clouds trapped in the valley. And then as the temperatures equalize during the day and the air mixes, we can have a lot of those clouds kind of rush up the canyons very quickly and cover pickups. Oftentimes it's a problem with our pickups. So, I would say that's the challenge when we're actually out operating, are these convective cloud issues and really clouds that are trapped in an inversion coming up into the elevation where we're picking up at the bottom of our runs.
So do you have to shut down those situations, or do you move to a different location, or how do you work with issues like that?
So what we try to do is always stay ahead of it. If we get trapped in it, we obviously have to sit down and wait. And oftentimes these issues will kind of go away with the cooling in the afternoon. So you'll get convective buildup in the heat of the day, and then later when it cools, it'll oftentimes open up a window where we can get the aircraft back to base. But we've really developed a good sense of it, and we're all very aware of it. So really the strategy is stay ahead of it. If we see it developing, then, get people into places where they can either ski to a road and we can just send the helicopter back to the base empty. That works here. We actually are in a fairly developed area where we do this. So a number of the drainages we ski, you can ski out, then we can pick people up with vehicles, and that occurs sometimes. We also can go to different airports that are around the area. So maybe if we've started here at Snowbird at our heli base and clouds are coming in and impacting this, we could fly to an airport in Heber, or we could go to a landing zone in Park City on the east side of the range where the weather's different. And so we always have those as backup plans. And but I would say really, our pilots and our guides are really tuned into it. We watch it, and we're pretty successful with just staying ahead of it, even though it does move quick. We have some things here in the canyon where we can land on ridges where we can ski down almost right back to our base. And we have a landing zone further up the canyon at the Alta Ski Resort. If we need to have the helicopter sit down and wait for the clouds to clear, they're just about a mile away, but quite a bit higher. So that'll be impacted by these clouds later. And we can land there. We wait for things to clear up and then bring them home.
That just sounds like an amazing place to work. Let's get into the meat and the bones of things. How did you get involved, or how did Powderbird get involved in avalanche mitigation work?
So in Little Cottonwood Canyon, where Alta and Snowbird are, there's a long history of avalanche mitigation. It goes back to the 50s. This is really the birthplace of it in America. It started with some of the avalanche forecasters dragging a howitzer up here, a military grade weapon, and starting to, shoot the slide pass with that. Prior to that, it was fairly uncontrolled. There were lots of issues, going back all the way to the 1800s when Alta was a mining town. It was actually hit by major avalanches that destroyed a lot of buildings. There were times when it killed, 12 or 15 people at a time. And so, the town actually was more or less destroyed by avalanche and fire, and was never really rebuilt to the greatest extent that it was back in those days. So when Powderbird started, there was this history here. There were people performing this kind of work. It was really necessary at Snowbird and at Alta to manage this with ski patrol. And I think the way the company really got into it was we were the ones with the helicopter. So somebody had the idea that, if we fly up there, we deploy the same type of explosives on what's called a ski route or a hand route, where you're at the ski resort, you're skiing, you're doing the same process with the same explosives. And, someone had the idea that, there's really no reason why we couldn't fly and do this. And so it just sort of started back in the 70s with the snow safety director at Snowbird was working as a guide at Powderbird. There was a helicopter here, and they put 2 and 2 together and figured this would be another tool in the toolbox.
Do you think you're getting better results with the helicopter because you can be more precise and maybe a little higher in your placements?
What I think is it's just another tool, and it fills a real niche, I think. So what goes on here on a regular basis is it's a combination of these ski routes, using artillery, using fixed avalanche mitigation placements, things like GazX, Wiesen towers, Obelix. These are kind of more newer technology. And the helicopter just fits into that whole mix. And I think what we're really well suited for are we're good at getting to the odd spots, a place where the artillery, just for whatever reason, they can't get the right angle, or we're really good at deploying explosives on cornice lines. With the artillery, you don't really want to shoot right at the ridge line, because if you miss, it can go over the ridge line and it can land, in a neighborhood down in Salt Lake, or it can go astray. And so those are more shots that are being fired more into the meat of the slope. We're able to really work right on the edges at the top, pick up the odd spots where, that type of equipment, or, those type of shots are just hard to hit. And strange weather patterns, if we get loading from a strange direction or a different direction, then we can get up close. We can see what's going on the slope, and we can adjust our placements very well, very much based on what we're seeing while we're very close to it. And so what I kind of think the helicopter is really good at here is this work will go on during the storm cycles, all these other mitigation measures. When the weather breaks, the helicopter can go up and we can kind of pick up the pieces. What got missed, what didn't get thought about during the storm. We can see it, we can survey everything, and then we can pick up the pieces. The other thing that we're good at is we can do it really quickly compared to sending people into a ski resort on skis and they're climbing ridges and they're trying to get to these areas. We can open a ski resort up, or a part of a ski resort up, just so much faster, and get the skiers on the slope and get the resort open. And I think that's a big benefit we can provide.
Well, you talked about the Utah Department of Transportation, talked about the ski resorts. Who makes the decision when to fly and where to fly?
So there's really three different entities. If we're doing it internally for our helicopter ski operation, then we make that decision with our snow safety director and our guide staff. Our protocol here for deciding things like this and where we ski is we run 2 different safety meetings a day. We do one in the morning, we do one in the afternoon. It's a daily thing we do every day of the year. And during those meetings, we talk about whether we should go out and, test stability with explosives. So that would be an in-house decision. If it's for the highway, each of the canyons here has a forecast team that's watching the weather. They're managing whether or not artillery will be used, whether or not the fixed placements will be used, or whether to call us. And so that's a team that's under the direction of a head of the avalanche program. And then each canyon has a number of different forecasters that are working really around the clock all season long to keep up with this. If they want us, then they make that decision and call us. And at the ski resorts, there's a snow safety department with a snow safety director. And they'll be the ones at the ski resorts. They'll look at their overall program and whether or not they want to include the helicopter on any given day is a decision they'll make.
Okay, well, as long as we're on the subject of the government side a little bit, do you work with the FAA on any kind of plan for operations like this?
We do, and actually, I'd like to share my screen here,
Please go ahead.
and I'll pull this up real quick. So this is the governing document for this type of work from the FAA. In Canada, they have a very similar document. And in here, I just wanted to put this up. So it's actually a fairly long document, but if people are interested, they can find this and go through, and it really spells out how you manage this whole process, this whole type of work. And so this, this is a fairly recent, 2016 document that was put out. And in there, it outlines really how all this gets done. Powderbird had a lot of input in working on this. And, we had developed some of these procedures here. And really this flows very closely to exactly how we do it.
I had a couple of other questions, but since you're already sharing your screen, Kevin, let's just jump right into the exciting stuff. Why don't you tell us how you do the avalanche mitigation work?
Okay, so the way this works is it starts with a pre-mission meeting with the team, and there's a 4-person team that does this. There's a pilot, a controller, a bombardier, and an observer. And so those 4 will sit together prior to going out. And what we'll start with is we'll review photos like this. So what this is showing, this is south-facing terrain above Little Cottonwood Canyon Road. And what's been identified on here over the years is the location of, important shot placements. And this can be used, some of these you can hit with artillery, some of these we hit with the helicopter, and some you can do with both. But so what we'll do is sit down, and if it's the highway department, they'll typically join us. They'll either send us this with these areas marked, or they'll join us in this meeting. And then we'll go through how many shots are we going to put out? We go through weather briefing. What kind of winds are we dealing with? We have problems with clouds. We go through all the standard stuff we would normally do. And then we'll talk about the mission, which is really how many shots, the order we're going to put them in, what's the plan for closing the road so that we know there's no traffic? How do we plan to sweep the area so we know there's nobody in the area? And so we start with that. Then what this is showing is, basically all those placements are named and they're numbered. And all of these pages are included in what's called an Avalanche Atlas. So the ski resorts will have one, the highway department will have one, and we have one for our Powderbird operating area, which, our operating area just for the heli skiing is about, it's over 100,000 acres. So we have a, pretty large area. We have run photos, we have pictures, and we'll go through all this before we get started. Then once we're going to, move towards, conducting the mission, we'll assemble the explosives in a very controlled environment where it's dry, it's clean. We don't want any snow to contaminate the fuses and lead to us, having duds in the field and things like that. So we assemble them. We put a reco chip on them, which is a chip that if it is a dud, we can come back later with a receiver and we can find it and retrieve the dud and just make sure we don't have unexploded ordnance left in the mountains. And once we get them all assembled, we'll take the explosives to the helicopter. We'll load it before we turn it on. So we don't, we we don't want the machine running, kicking up snow or anything like that. We don't want the commotion of any of that going on. We'll load it in there. And then the team gets in. The observer is really there to observe the explosives. The bombardier will deploy them. And then the controller is really the key position to coordinate between the pilot and the explosives team in the back seat. Once we get up in the air, the first thing we'll do is go into the area where we're going to work, and we perform a sweep of the area. It's one of the most crucial parts of the mission. And we'll start up, you'll go from the starting zones to the run out zones. We look at adjacent drainages. If there's a ridge line where an avalanche may propagate over a ridge. And so we sweep the slide path we're shooting, we sweep the adjacent ones. And we're looking for basically tracks in the snow, human and wildlife. Last time we did this, we had a bunch of elk in the run out zone. We were able to scare them out of there before we did the work. And oftentimes we're going out right after a snowstorm, so there are no tracks. It's easy to tell. If we see tracks and we can't confirm no one's there, then we cancel the mission. So if we don't know for sure nobody's in the area, then we'll cancel the mission and we just won't deploy those shots. Once we know the sweep has been conducted and we're all comfortable, it's a group effort. It's one of the things we go through is everybody comfortable with the sweep? You get a thumbs up and an affirmative from everyone. And then we'll go and we'll start to make the pass. And the way that really works is the controller will work with the pilot to identify where the targets are. They'll talk about how they're going to fly through there. Are we going to fly in and hover? Are we going to fly through with airspeed? How high do we want to be? And a lot of that's depending on how windy it is. If it's a nice, cold, calm day, sometimes we can go in and hover. If it's the day we're dealing with winds, a lot of times we're flying through with quite a bit of airspeed. And so the controller figures all that out. Once he determines that we're ready to go, he'll tell the observer how many shots we're going to put out. So it'll be something like, we're going to do 3 doubles. Then the observer will prepare one. The bombardier will have, by that point, opened the door of the helicopter. He'll have the explosives ready to ignite them. When we're ready to ignite, the controller says pull. We use a pull igniter for these. He'll pull that, and then the controller will say now when it's time to deploy. And then the bombardier will at that point deploy it out the door. Once he sees that the explosive is clear of the aircraft and falling in free space, then he says clear. And so the way the cadence really works is it's ready, and the observer goes ready. Pull, the bombardier says pull. Now, the bombardier says, or the controller says now, and then clear. And so it's the same cadence every time. And at that point, we pull back to a safe distance. We watch to make sure everything detonates, so that we can determine there are no unexploded shots out there. And then if something does trigger, if we get a result, we follow that with the helicopter, and we'll follow that down, and we'll see how big it is. We'll record that. And then we share that information with the whole avalanche community here, with the ski resorts and the backcountry avalanche forecast center, with the highway guys. And we want to share all that information. So, and
Well, Kevin, can we see you in action?
yeah, so what that looks like is something like this. Here's our bombardier using the pull spitters, and he just deployed it out the aircraft. We're right up on the very top of the ridge here. Now, after that's happened, we've pulled back. And if you look in this photo, there's actually going to be 3 slides that start running. We did a 3-shot pass here. One is running on the far left already, a smaller one. We've got this one here in the center. that came off the high triangle up there. And then the biggest one on this is an area called Storm Mountain. You know, we got a fairly large result here on this right side, the third shot. And so we're back at a very, you know, a pretty far away, safe distance. You have to be careful not to be too close. Sometimes if you put shots in, maybe they can kick up some rock. You don't want to be close with the helicopter. So we stay back quite a ways. Watch it run down here. And this is the exciting part. This is,
Indeed, this is the exciting part.
yeah,
It's not like the action movies where you set the explosives and walk away and don't watch. This is the fun part.
yep.
You see a bit of a cloud layer there. You talked about that.
Yeah, so that cloud layer was high enough. So the way we did the sweep here is you can see the road in this video. We started down at the road. We came up underneath all those clouds on our first pass. You know, we had a nice ceiling above us. We were able to climb up underneath there and confirm nobody was in here. And then we pulled back out. We got above the clouds to do the deployment. And then, but initially, so if that cloud deck were thicker and we couldn't get underneath there, then we would have backed off of something like this. But with that one, it was fairly broken and high enough we could climb up underneath. You look around, everyone's feeling okay, we're clear. And then here you can see the road. The highway department has stopped the traffic down canyon and up canyon. And so we're in radio communication with them and they're managing the traffic there.
And that snow just keeps coming and coming and coming. It's quite an elevation drop there.
Yeah, that one is about almost 4,500 feet from where that started to where the road is. And so here's another look at the same thing. There's the bombardier pulling, those are called spitters or a pull igniter.
And he's doing that barehanded.
Yeah, so the reason we do it barehanded is when we're managing the explosives, we want to have our bare fingers on the fuses to just make sure that nothing's ignited. If with a glove on, if it's ignited, you're not going to feel it. With a bare finger, if it's ignited and it's burning, it's going to burn your finger a little bit. You're going to feel the heat. So we handle all the explosives with bare hands. And, you know, more or less, if you're the observer, you're holding it, you know, right up near the pull igniter with bare fingers, just in the event that something very odd happens. You want to know that if it's ignited. And what these fuses are, they're 90 seconds. So we've got 90 seconds from the time you pull that to the time that it's going to explode. And what we try to do is deploy it within 10 to 15 seconds after pulling it. And so we don't like to hang on to them for too long. You can also see in that picture that he's tethered in. So he's wearing a harness with a tether, and then that's got a quick release mechanism on it. So, you know, it's carabiner to the floor, but right at his waist, there's a way to just pull a piece of webbing and it'll release that. So he's not really fixed into the aircraft with like two carabiners that you can't get out of. With this, if he needs to, he can pull that quick release on the tether and be out of it, you know, instantaneous, really. So here's another, you know, after we put that in, here's another kind of a look. This is a different sort of slide path with a lot of trees around it. So, you know, the way we sweep here is a little different. We're hovering more, we're looking into the trees. And this is a very obvious slide path through the forest. You can see where it's thick trees on both sides, and then you can see where the avalanche, when you do get big avalanches, pretty much exactly where it's going to run. You can see the road down below. And again, the highway department just closed above and below this slide path. And we were able to do this these two placements we were able to do with the road only being closed for 20 minutes. So that was, really a low impact on all of the skiers wanting to get up and go skiing that morning.
If you have a really heavy snow load, have you ever had the avalanches go ahead and close the highway, block the highway?
Yes. So in this one, you can see the slide path goes, the trees are gone all the way to the creek right there. And about 25 years ago, we did this same shot and put about 30 feet of snow and maybe 300 or 400 trees and about 30 feet of snow right there on the road.
I saw the cars there at the bottom of the road. They must have had quite a view. That would have been pretty dramatic to watch.
Yeah. And this is the same, one thing we try to do, this is the same slide path. And we don't want to impact the road if we don't have to. So what we'll try to do is shoot it in pieces. So we went up and we shot the left side, the looker's left side of this first, and we got this one. Then we shot the main part of the bowl and we got one out of there. And then we shot the right part of the bowl and we got one out of there. So instead of going and putting in, 6 or 8 shots across this whole thing, we put in actually 2 shots, 3 shots, and then 2 shots. And that way we got 3 avalanches instead of one just massive avalanche. And then it brings out the hazard, but it also is less likely to, have tree damage, close the road, things like that. If you put all the shots in at once on a day like this where it was really unstable, I think if we put them all in at once, we would have buried the road for sure. So we try not to do that.
Well, I think that comes again from 30 to 40 years of experience in doing it. You know what you need to do to help keep things going. Kevin, who are you? You talked a little bit about the different roles. Can you talk about the people who are flying on the project and how you select them?
Yeah, so all of the folks that do this are longtime avalanche workers. And most of us started this by working for Ski Patrol and for the snow safety departments at either Alta or Snowbird. I got my start at Alta. We have other guys that were doing the same work at Snowbird. But the way you really get into it is you start by being a member of a team like that. You get introduced to the whole how to handle explosives, how do you assemble them. You get put on a route where you'll be given a certain number of shots and a shots sheet, and you go out with your skis on and you do it with a partner at the ski resort. And so all of us initially started with that kind of experience and quite a bit of that kind of experience. Then what we do, all of the guys that are doing this are guides for our heli ski business. So that background is very relevant to heli guiding. You have the explosive knowledge. Once you are here for a while and you have a very good familiarity with all the terrain, then we'll start to put people into these teams. And it's a very small group. We have about 6 people total that'll do it. We need to have 2 teams of 3 plus a pilot, because oftentimes we'll do this out of a couple aircraft at once. So we have about 6 people that do it here. They're all have been here for either going on a decade or for some of us for 30 years and even over 30 years. And so we don't rotate people in and out much. It's once you're on, really until that person retires, there's not a space that opens up.
I can imagine it seems like it seems like it's an adventure. I have to admit, it sounds like fun. I mean, I know that it's an incredibly serious business that you have done, obviously, quite a lot of work to make it safe as possible, but I can imagine that people stick with it.
No, they do. And it's really one of the great things about our Powderbird team is we have very long-term players. We have very low turnover. We're able to bring new people in and mentor them with folks that have, decades of experience. and a real intimate familiarity with what we're doing. And that is one of the key factors in our whole safety program is that we just have long-term players. And but when we do bring someone on, there's a process. What you end up doing is you start as the observer. You'll do a number of missions as the observer. Then you'll progress to be in the bombardier, and then you'll progress to be in the controller. And that can take a while. We don't do this. This isn't like a daily thing for us. We may do this 15 to 20 times a year, maybe. Some years we'll do it a little more than others based on the weather variations year to year. But, so for someone to progress through that and become a controller can be a 5 or 6 or 7 year process.
Okay, Kevin, well, if you don't mind, let's get into some of the questions we've received. Utah, of course, and your area is well known for the powder snow. When you're skiing, how do you have problems with whiteouts, and how do you deal with those?
We do. We identify that. So the way we start managing that is in our morning workflow at our morning safety meeting. We have a standard workflow that we go through that covers everything from weather to avalanche conditions, aviation hazards and considerations, and operations for the day. And it's a standard workflow that we do the same every day. Our pilots are part of that. All of our guide team is part of that. And under the aviation hazards and considerations module, if we have light blowing snow, we identify it right there as a hazard for the day so that everybody's aware this is something to look at. This is something to watch for. Some days we'll get into spring, it's not really a hazard. We'll have other hazards. But if we think it's a hazard, we start off by notifying everybody and talking about it in the morning meeting. Then once we go out, I mentioned earlier that we try to maintain as best we can these landing zones and pickup zones. So we've set these up over the years in places where there's natural references, where the area is big enough, but there's vegetation around, or there's a rock, there's some natural reference. And once the first guide gets in to the LZ or to the PZ or the LZ, then we'll put a wand out with the orange flagging on it. We'll put orange chalk on the ground. We'll stomp the dry snow down and pack it. And then so the second time the pilot's in, he's coming into a spot that's been improved. That typically, it takes it from being very difficult sometimes on the first landing to significantly easier and better and safer on the second landing. If we feel like we have to go do that without clients on board, we can and sometimes do, but typically we'll go up and we'll do it with clients. We'll just ease in with the pilot the first time. We'll get started. The thing about the pickups that's better is the guides can get there first. So they get dropped off on top. They can ski down. By the time the pilot's coming into the bottom to pick people up, it's been stomped out, marked, flagged, and then the guide is also a reference. We wear bright orange clothing, so we're very visible, and we'll wait outside in a point where we're a reference for the pilot when he's landing.
You actually answered a fair amount of this. Amy Arndt, one of our viewers, is asking what kind of a risk assessment do you do pre-flight? Is there anything else you can address there?
So our risk assessment covers, for the aviation, it's things like this. We identify the big factors for us. We identify our area of operation, so we know what kind of elevations we're dealing with. We identify things like whiteout. If we have an early season weak snowpack where the helicopter may settle into the snow unevenly, we identify that as a hazard. We also go through very detailed avalanche forecasting and identifying avalanche problems, what we call avalanche problems, and they can be persistent problems that we deal with for all or most of the season. They can be storm-related issues. They can be heat-related issues on the snow. So, and then, I think we do a very thorough briefing on weather. Do we have stable weather? Do we have convective cloud issues today? Do we have high relative humidity that if the sun comes out, we're going to get cloud buildup? And so I think, our whole risk assessment basically covers those topics, the weather hazards. And, in there we'll talk about things like if it's really cold, there's a cold hazard for our clients, or there could be a sunburn hazard for our clients. And we try to cover all that stuff. And then everybody participates. Everyone at the table has time to speak. It's not run by one person who's telling the team what to do. There's a forecaster that runs the meeting, but when it comes time for the aviation considerations, we go pilot by pilot. Do you have anything today? Would you like to add anything today? And they may bring things up or they may not.
Okay. I have a question from Jeff Bay. Do you ever, just looks like regarding the skiers, do you ever tow in or single skid passenger pickups or drop-offs?
Not as a routine procedure when we're operating. We really try to avoid it. We have done it, but it's if we're doing it with passengers, sometimes it's when we're trying to pick somebody up that's been injured, somebody that they're injured in a place where they're difficult to get to, and but maybe the easiest way to extract them is through some type of a tow-in. We can load them in the helicopter and go, versus trying to put them into some type of a sked or a sled and take them down through very difficult terrain. We have developed a whole kit of lightweight, very effective rescue gear that our plan is to move them to a good landing area. I'd say in the past, we would do that kind of thing more frequently than we would ever do it now. The other thing with operating here is we have access to air medical helicopters, some of which have a hoist capability. So if we end up with someone in a difficult place, we also will call, and we have no problem calling and getting the right aircraft in to manage those situations the best way possible. So I guess to answer the question, in the past, we used to do things like that, but we've moved very far away from it. And it might, I can't say for sure we never do it, but we really don't encourage our team to do it.
It sounds like a case-by-case situation, and you're mitigating the risks as you go along.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to welcome back one of our longtime viewers, Gabriel Amato. Kevin, how do you manage your pilots in the off time? High season on, low season off, 6 months, 6 months? What kind of a schedule do they have?
So the pilots actually are working really as subcontractors for us. So their schedules are determined. Really, the way they all work is they tend to get their time off after fire season in the fall and after ski season in the spring. And when they're here, they'll be on, part of the reason we have 5 of them managing 3 aircraft is, they'll be on a schedule of like 10 days on, 4 days off, or they'll be here for, 2 or 3 weeks, then away for a week, and we'll get a relief pilot in to cover them. So when they're working with us, they're not on duty every day of the season. They do get scheduled breaks. And then if we start, on a run, what I call a run, where we have good weather and we're operating a lot, then we really look to just manage their daily work, make sure that we're not getting them up here too early or keeping them too late. And if we need to, then we'll bring in a relief pilot. We really focus on pilot and guide fatigue and try to manage that with rest breaks for the whole team. Everyone gets scheduled time off.
Very good. From Jeff Doran, I apologize, Jeff, for messing up your name. You mentioned the Canadian version of the FAA Avalanche Control Manual. Do you happen to know who produces or issues it, or the document name by any chance?
I can find it, but it's basically like the, I think it's in British Columbia. I'd have to look at the name. I don't have it right in front of me, but it's a document that was produced more for the highway department, and I think in British Columbia. And I'd have to look and see.
Okay, appreciate that, Jeff. We might be able to look it up too. It's something probably we can look through the Transport Canada website, do a search. But if we can find it, we'll try to get a response to you as well. Gabriel Amato, a second question. Do you helibike in the summer when there's no snow? What kind of risk mitigation do you do for that mission type? Yeah, let's go with that. There's a little bit more, but it's the same question.
Yeah, we really don't. I would say just prior to COVID, we looked at expanding into some operations, summer operations here in Utah. All of that has been a little sidetracked with just dealing with the pandemic right now. But we have I'd say a sister company kind of relationship with a guide service that does not heli biking, but like heli fishing, heli hiking, things like that. And really the big factor here in Utah in the summer is we're flying at, they're flying at these elevations with a lot of heat. It can be very hot and high conditions. So managing, weighing people, taking actual weights, weighing all the equipment. That's a big part of what we do in the winter. We actually get real weights on everybody, on all the equipment, everything that's going in, and have manifests that reflect what the actual weights are.
Actually, Kevin, I think that was my last question for you. It looks like we timed it out just about perfectly. We're right up near the top of the hour. I, again, am grateful for your time. Really appreciate the fact that you were willing to share your knowledge with the members of our industry. I'm going to share my screen. I'll let you turn your camera off now and your mic. I'll turn my camera up and we'll show your website and your email address. And so if people did have questions, I know you had indicated you were okay with them contacting you. Looks like, do I have that correct?
Yep, that's correct. And thank you for the time. I love the work you guys do. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Oh, well, again, we're grateful for your time, Kevin, and all our best to everybody at Powderbird. Look forward to seeing and hearing more about you folks in the future.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, we will do a bit of our wrap up now, just our housekeeping duties. Coming up next week, this is going to be a lot of fun. Some of you who may have been on a recent webinar for us, next week is Ask Three Old Guys. Stan Rose, who's a longtime industry expert participant, indicated that during Heli Expo, during a training session, if you look in the back of the room, there's three usually guys who've been there, done that, and they're willing to share their wisdom. And so we actually want you to send us your questions in advance for the three old guys sharing their wisdom. Things you might not learn from a training manual, from a flight school, or from an FAR, or other aeronautical programs. How do you deal with a problem coworker? How do you deal with a particular issue? If you've gotten yourself into a situation while you're flying, but you don't want to ask it out loud, we will de-identify the questions for this one. You do not need to share who you are for some of the questions if you're concerned or embarrassed about asking them. On March 18th, we have a lawyer's view of your insurance policy, another one where we think that we can really get some interest for that one. On March 25th, we will not have a webinar. That week is the week of our manufacturers' technical briefings. Those have traditionally taken place at HAI Heli Expo. Unfortunately, we couldn't hold that this year because of the pandemic. that doesn't mean we can't bring the information to you. That whole week, the manufacturer's technical briefings will take place Monday through Thursday. If you look at our website, rotor.org, right on the front page in the upper right-hand corner, there's a link that takes you to those manufacturer's technical briefings. So if you're looking for an IA renewal or just information about your aircraft, it's a great place to go take a look and see what's going to be coming in. There'll be a lot of technical information that week. All of our webinars are at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We will be sending out links to each of the webinars, and we will be posting those on social media. Those will also come out through Rotor Daily. There is a questionnaire. We think the questionnaire probably will not come out until tomorrow. It may come out later today with the new Zoom platform. We were trying to get our ducks in a row, and we weren't sure we got everything lined up to send it out this afternoon, but there will be a questionnaire coming. Please let us know how we're doing with the webinars, or if there's a subject you'd like to see us address. If you know of something that you think it would be of interest to us, please let us know that one too. Things like today, where we were able to look at avalanche mitigation through the lens of a company that's been doing it for a long, long time and doing it well, doing it safely. If HAI can do anything for you, please let us know that too. The easiest way to do that is through the email address president@rotor.org. Jim looks for your comments, your questions, your concerns, your compliments, anything that we can do better, anything that we're maybe not doing well enough, let us know. And that does wrap things up for this week. We certainly appreciate your time, your patience, and your interest in our show. And we look forward to having you join us again next week.